I never imagined that a piece of paper tacked to my front door would lead to one of the most satisfying acts of revenge I'd ever experienced. But there it was, a wedding invitation not addressed to me, but listing my historic family home as a venue for some stranger's nuptials. At first, I thought it was a bizarre prank, but the crisp, cream-colored paper with its embossed gold lettering looked far too expensive for practical joke. The names Rebecca and James Thornton meant nothing to me, and yet according to this invitation, they planned to hold their wedding in my backyard in exactly 3 weeks. I stood on my porch, morning coffee growing cold in my hand, as confusion gave way to disbelief, and disbelief quickly transformed into white-hot anger. My name is Michael Foster, a 38-year-old architect who had recently returned to my hometown of Willowbrook to restore my grandmother's Victorian farmhouse after her passing 6 months ago. The property had been in our family for over 100 years, a stunning 5-acre parcel with gardens that had once been featured in home and garden magazines. My grandmother, Eleanor Foster, had been a respected botanist who transformed the grounds into a showpiece of native plants and heritage roses. When I inherited the estate, I took a sabbatical from my firm in Chicago to honor her memory by bringing the property back to its former glory. The house needed work. The roof leaked in 3 places, the plumbing was temperamental at best, and the once vibrant gardens had become overgrown after Gran's long illness. But beneath the neglect lay the bones of something magnificent. I took the invitation inside and called a number printed at the bottom. After several rings, a harried-sounding woman answered. "Hello, Thornton Caldwell Wedding." Rebecca speaking. She chirped in a voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I explained as calmly as possible that there seemed to be some confusion about the venue for her wedding. "Oh, you must be calling about the parking arrangements," she said dismissively. "We've arranged for guests to park along Maple Lane, so your driveway won't be blocked." My patience evaporated like morning dew in August. "No, Miss Thornton, I'm calling because you apparently scheduled your wedding at my private residence without permission," I stated flatly. "I'm Michael Foster, the owner of the property you've listed on your invitation." The silence that followed lasted several heartbeats before Rebecca's voice returned, no longer syrupy but sharp as a newly honed knife. "This is ridiculous. I've already paid the venue fee to the Willowbrook Heritage Association. Everything has been arranged for months. The Foster Gardens is a registered historical venue. It says so right on the town website." I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache forming behind my eyes. The property was never registered with any heritage association. I explained it's my private residence, and I've never given permission for events. Rebecca's derisive laugh cut through the phone line. "Well, I have a contract that says otherwise. I suggest you take it up with Cynthia Morgan at the HOA." I was ushered into a conference room where Cynthia Morgan sat at the head of an oval table, surrounded by 4 other people who watched my entrance with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Cynthia herself hadn't changed since our first meeting. Her blonde bob was immaculately styled, her navy blazer perfectly pressed, and the string of pearls around her neck caught the light as she turned to face me. "Mr. Foster," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her ice-blue eyes, "what seems to be the problem?" "The problem, Ms. Morgan," I replied evenly, "is that you're advertising my property as a wedding venue without permission, taking money for bookings, and allowing strangers to plan events on my land." A ripple of whispers ran through the room, but Cynthia's expression remained unchanged. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said smoothly. "The Foster property was added to our Heritage Sites program last year. Your grandmother signed the agreement herself." She nodded to a man sitting to her right, who slid a document across the table toward me. I picked it up, immediately recognizing a poor attempt at forging my grandmother's signature on what appeared to be a property use agreement. The date showed it had been signed just 3 months before her death, when she had been in hospice care and barely able to hold a pen, let alone sign legal documents. "This signature is forged," I stated flatly, feeling my pulse pounding in my temples. My grandmother was in hospice care on this date, heavily medicated and physically incapable of signing anything. Furthermore, she would never have agreed to this. She specifically purchased this property because it was outside HOA jurisdiction. I dropped the paper back onto the table as if it were contaminated. "I want all bookings canceled immediately, my property removed from your website, and any funds returned to these people. You defrauded them." Cynthia's smile hardened into something predatory. "That's quite an accusation, Mr. Foster. The agreement is legally binding, witnessed by 2 board members. Your grandmother understood that maintaining a property of historical significance requires community support." A woman sitting next to Cynthia nodded vigorously. "The Heritage Sites program helps preserve Willowbrook's character while generating maintenance funds. It's really in everyone's best interest." I recognize her as Sharon Peterson, who owned a luxury boutique in town. The arrangement specifies that 60% of booking fees go toward property upkeep, she added, as if this was some generous concession. I've received exactly $0 for property upkeep, I counted, making air quotes with my fingers, and I've never agreed to any such arrangement. Where has this money been going? The uncomfortable glances exchanged around the table told me everything I needed to know. Cynthia cleared her throat, straightening the already straight pen beside her notepad. There's been a reserve fund established, of course. We were planning to approach you about necessary improvements once you'd settled in. Her words were hunted, but I could sense a desperation beneath. How many? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Excuse me, Cynthia blinked, her composure slipping slightly. How many bookings have you taken for my property? Sharon Peterson jumped in, apparently trying to defuse the situation. Just 3 this season, the Thornton wedding this month and 2 more in June and July. All very tasteful events, I assure you. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. I'll be speaking with my attorney about this immediately. In the meantime, I suggest you start making phone calls to explain to these people that you've been selling access to property you don't own or control. I turned to leave, but Cynthia's voice stopped me at the door. Mr. Foster, I strongly advise against making this difficult. Willowbrook Estates represents over 300 homeowners with significant influence in this community. The Heritage Sites program has been very popular, bringing tourism dollars to local businesses. I turned back slowly. Is that a threat, Miss Morgan? Her smile returned, brittle as thin ice. Simply a statement of fact. Sometimes it's better to be a team player. The implied threat followed me like a shadow as I drove straight to the law office of James Harrington, my grandmother's attorney and a family friend. James's secretary ushered me straight into his wood-paneled office, where the 60-something lawyer listened with increasing alarm as I explained the situation. This is outrageous, he muttered, examining the forged agreement I'd photographed with my phone. Eleanor would never have agreed to this. She was fiercely protective of her privacy and her gardens. And the signature isn't even a good forgery. Look here. Eleanor's had a distinctive loop. This doesn't even come close. James promised to send a cease and desist letter immediately, but his weathered face betrayed concern. Cynthia Morgan has accumulated considerable power in this town, Michael. Her husband sits on the city council, her brother-in-law is a judge, and the HOA wields significant influence with local businesses. This won't be a simple matter of legal right and wrong. It's going to get political. I nodded, already suspecting as much from Cynthia's veiled threat. What do they actually stand to gain from this? I asked. Even with multiple bookings, we're talking about what, $20,000 to $30,000 a year in venue fees? That seems like small potatoes for the risk they are taking. James leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. I suspect this is about more than money, Michael. Your grandmother's property is the last large parcel in the area not under HOA control. It's a 5-acre green space surrounded by increasingly dense development. My guess is the Heritage program is just a first step in establishing some form of control over the property. He rummaged through a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Eleanor suspected something like this might happen. She asked me to give you this if there were ever any challenges to the property's independence. Inside the folder were land surveys, original deeds, and documentation showing that my grandmother had repeatedly rejected offers from developers and the HOA to purchase or incorporate her land. Most interesting was a letter from the city dated just a year before her death, confirming that attempts to rezone the property or claim it through eminent domain had been rejected. She knew they'd come after it, I murmured, feeling a renewed connection to my grandmother's foresight. James nodded. Eleanor was nobody's fool. She left you not just a property, but the ammunition to defend it. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. A cease and desist letter would establish a legal position, but it wouldn't solve the immediate problem of the Thornton wedding scheduled in just 3 weeks. And something told me Cynthia Morgan wasn't going to back down easily. She had too much invested in this scheme, both financially and in terms of her reputation. Back at the house, I walked the property, seeing it with new eyes, not just as my grandmother's beloved home, but as a valuable piece of real estate others were scheming to control. The gardens, even in their currently neglected state, were breathtaking. Spring bulbs pushed through the soil in chaotic but beautiful profusion. The gazebo, though needing paint, stood gracefully at the center of what had once been a rose garden. I could understand why brides would be drawn to this setting, but that didn't give anyone the right to trespass or profit from my property without permission. As the evening fell, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, contemplating my next move. My brooding was interrupted by the arrival of a beat-up blue pickup truck that pulled into my driveway. A tall, wiry man in his 70s emerged, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who had spent a lifetime doing physical labor. I recognized Walter Jenkins, my grandmother's groundskeeper, who had retired shortly before her death. "Heard you were having some trouble with a Morgan woman," he called as he approached the porch. "News traveled fast in small towns. Mind if I join you?" I gestured to the empty chair beside me, and Walter settled in with a grunt of satisfaction. "Your grandmother would be spinning in her grave if she knew what they were trying to pull," he said without preamble. "Been watching them circle this place like vultures for years." Walter declined my offer of bourbon, but accepted a glass of water. "They started small," he continued. "First, it was just comment about the height of the grass or branches hanging over the property line. Then came the letters about community standards and how the gardens could be shared resources." Walter's weathered face creased with disgust. "Your grandmother told Cynthia to pound sand in those exact words. I was standing right here when she said it." I couldn't help but smile, picturing my gentle but fiercely independent grandmother delivering that message. "So now they've escalated to forging her signature and selling access to property," I mused. "The question is, what do I do about the Thornton wedding in 3 weeks?" Walter took a thoughtful sip of water. "Well, seems to me you've got 3 options. 1, you go along with it, let them hold their wedding, and fight the larger battle later. 2, you get your lawyer to shut it down, deal with the fallout from a disappointed bride and her 200 guests. Or 3, his eyes twinkled with mischief, you find a creative way to make sure nobody wants to have their fancy wedding here." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this third option. "What did you have in mind?" Walter chuckled. "Your grandmother always said, sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to be spectacularly unreasonable yourself. Make it memorable." Over the next hour, Walter filled me in on the local politics I'd missed during my years away. Cynthia Morgan had transformed the once reasonable Willowbrook Estates HOA into a personal fiefdom, using increasingly strict rules to force out homeowners who oppose a vision or question her authority. The Heritage Sites program had begun with legitimately registered historical buildings whose owners had willingly participated. But as the program grew more profitable, properties were added without proper permission, always with the same justification of preserving community character, while generating funds that seemed to disappear into administrative costs. "Most folks are too intimidated to fight back," Walter explained. "Cynthia's husband can make life difficult for local businesses through selective enforcement of city codes. Her social circle includes every influential person in town. They close ranks." He drained his water glass and stood to leave. "But your grandmother taught me something important. Bullies only maintain power when people are afraid to challenge them. And Eleanor Foster's grandson shouldn't be afraid of the likes of Cynthia Morgan." As his truck disappeared down the driveway, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wouldn't just defend my property. I would make such a spectacular example of Cynthia's overreach that she'd never dare try something like this again. The next morning brought a response to the cease and desist letter, not from Cynthia directly but from the HOA's attorney. The carefully worded document acknowledged my ownership of the property while insisting that the Heritage Sites Agreement was binding due to my grandmother's signature and suggesting that any disruption to planned events would result in legal action for breach of contract and damages. James called to discuss next steps, but I already had a plan forming. "Hold off on responding," I told him. "I have an idea that might solve this problem more effectively than a legal battle." My first step was research. I spent hours online learning everything I could about Rebecca Thornton, the bride who had unwittingly become entangled in Cynthia's scheme. Social media revealed she was a local realtor working for the same agency that handled most of Willowbrook Estates property transactions. Her fiancé, James Caldwell, was a developer whose company had built the newest section of the HOA community. The connections were becoming clearer. This wasn't just any wedding. It was a social and business alliance between families deeply embedded in Cynthia's power structure. No wonder she was so determined to make it happen. Next, I contacted several local businesses, careful to avoid those with close ties to the HOA. I made appointments, explained my situation, and was surprised by how many people were eager to help once they understood what was happening. It seemed Walter was right. There was significant resentment towards Cynthia's tactics simmering beneath the surface of Willowbrook's picture-perfect exterior. By the end of the week, I had assembled everything I needed for what my grandmother would have called a strategic demonstration of consequences. The Saturday before the scheduled wedding, I was ready. I deliberately maintained radio silence with both Cynthia and the HOA's attorney, letting them believe I might be intimidated by their legal threats. At precisely 7:30 in the morning, just late enough to be legal under the town's noise ordinance, but early enough to ensure maximum attention, 3 large trucks rumbled up my driveway. The first carried a portable toilet company whose workers began efficiently placing 20 bright blue portable toilets in a neat row across my front lawn. The second truck brought a pest control company whose employees started placing large yellow warning pest treatment in progress signs around the property perimeter. The third and most impressive was from Johnson's Demolition and Excavation, complete with a small bulldozer on a trailer. I'd warned my immediate neighbors about the commotion, explaining truthfully that I was undertaking significant landscape renovations. Most were sympathetic once they heard about the HOA's overreach. It turned out Cynthia had made few friends with her heavy-handed tactics. As workers in high-visibility vests swarmed across my property, I noticed curtains twitching in several Willowbrook Estates homes visible from my backyard. It took less than 30 minutes for the first curious onlookers to gather on the sidewalk, and exactly 45 minutes for a sleek silver Mercedes to come screeching into my driveway. Cynthia Morgan emerged like a thundercloud in human form, designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly highlighted hair, wearing what appeared to be tennis clothes. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing wildly at the activity around us. I smiled pleasantly, clipboard in hand, as I checked off items on my list. "Good morning, Cynthia. Just getting the property ready for some major renovations. The entire backyard is being redesigned, new drainage, excavation for a koi pond, complete replanting." I gestured to the bulldozer being unloaded from its trailer. "We're starting on Monday morning." Cynthia's face went through a fascinating range of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror. "Monday? You can't possibly be serious. The Thornton-Caldwell wedding is next Saturday." I affected a look of innocent confusion. "Wedding? Oh, you must be referring to the event you scheduled on my property without permission." "Yes, I suppose this would interfere with that, wouldn't it?" I tapped my chin thoughtfully. Terrible timing, but since I never agreed to host any wedding and since this is my private property, I'm free to make whatever improvements I see fit. The portable toilets are for the work crew. By the way, they'll be here for at least 3 weeks. As if on cue, Rebecca Thornton's car pulled in behind Cynthia's. The bride-to-be leapt out with her phone clutched in her hand. "What is happening here?" she cried, taking in the portable toilets and pest control signs with visible distress. "I just got calls from 3 different neighbors." Cynthia turned to her, clearly struggling to maintain composure. "Rebecca, darling, there's been a slight misunderstanding with Mr. Foster about the Heritage Sites program. I'm sure we can work something out." She turned back to me, lowering her voice. "Be reasonable, Michael. We can discuss compensation or perhaps some sort of compromise." I shook my head, maintaining my pleasant tone even as I stood my ground. "There's no misunderstanding. Cynthia, you forged my grandmother's signature and have been selling access to my property without permission. I've decided that rather than pursue legal action for fraud, trespassing, and misrepresentation, I'll simply exercise my right to improve my property however I see fit." I turned to Rebecca, whose mascara was already beginning to run as tears welled in her eyes. "Miss Thornton, I'm truly sorry that you've been caught in the middle of this. You should know that Cynthia never had the right to offer my property as a venue. Whatever money you paid for this location was taken under false pretense. This is the first part. Subscribe channel and watch the full stories. Thank you."